Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Diverse Thinking, Different Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Karen Wilson. I'm excited today to have with me April Rehrig. She will be sharing her unique approach to special education reform, which advocates for team collaboration and communication to ensure every child feels valued. With 20 plus years of experience in the field, April is the founder of Rise Educational Advocacy and Consulting, where she aims to help parents and teachers navigate the IEP process using a strength-based approach. Today, April is going to walk us through 5 keys to productive IEPs.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, April. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Karen.
I'm so glad you're here. I was reading all about you before we were connected. You are a seasoned education advocate. You know, you're the founder of Rise Educational Advocacy, which we'll talk about a little while later. And what you do is you really guide families through the IEP or 504 process. And it's so important for so many families who have a kiddo who has been struggling in the school system, who are seeking support. And I'm always interested in what gets people started in doing the work they do. I'd love for you to speak to that if you can.
Sure. I've been working with students, neurodivergent kids, since I was a teenager. I was lucky enough as a teenager to do volunteer work. And one of the first places I worked was a special education school, right? Which was back then they had a lot more of those schools available. And so I went into the school and I fell in love. And I came from a family of educators, but I don't remember sitting in a classroom or being in a high school and knowing where the resource room was or knowing where things were. I knew there were students that had needs, but I never quite knew, that they were there. So this was sort of my first exposure of, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then as an undergraduate, I studied psychology, but I never really heard about school psychology. They didn't tell us about it. And I thought, oh, I'm going to become a teacher. So I became a teacher, Karen. And of course, my first year, as many teachers out there may be listening, I had 12 boys in the classroom, 5 girls, and I was the new teacher. So I got all of the students who struggled the most. So of course, my students weren't performing well. Of course, the principal told me your test scores are low because I got all the students who didn't speak English. And many students who had never been in the country for more than a few months. And so why would it be a surprise that all of a sudden they were just learning how to speak English, let alone reading and writing and phonics? So I decided to refer one of my least performing students because he wasn't doing well. And I just assumed that he had a learning disability. Well, sure enough, I came to the IEP meeting. I found the school psychologist in a closet, which is where we tend to work. And during the meeting, she said, April, thank you so much for referring him. He is not learning disabled. He's gifted. And the reason why he's not doing well is because you have not met his needs. And I thought, what is this? This completely turned my expectations and presuming competence, which I talk about a lot, upside down. It changed my view of what is students who need support. And it also drove me to school psychology. So I became a psychologist for 20 years. I worked in many different districts, districts that were in, the highest performing schools and districts where, it would be 15% would graduate. There was 20 kids on the roster in the classroom and 2 students showed up. So I decided after 20 years of being a school psychologist that there was a growing thing inside of me that I wanted to make things different at the table. And being a parent myself of 3 boys, I knew that the only way to make things better was to advocate. But the advocacy style that I chose was different because I didn't want to be like the other advocates. I didn't want to be the one that was sitting there and telling the school they were wrong or filing, a complaint. I wanted to bridge the gap. And so that's what I do is I bridge the gap between schools and parents and students and teachers. And I empower kids because if we work together, we can make things better. And that's how I came into this industry, is kind of living it, seeing it, breathing it, and finding a different way, that we can work together.
That is so wonderful. And I love the example you gave about the kiddo who ended up being gifted, because so many times kids struggle. And unless we really do a deeper dive into understanding why they're struggling, we're not going to be able to provide them the kinds of support and meet their needs in the way that we really need to. So I just love that example. Love the work that you're doing, because it's so important. And when I think about the IEP process, having worked with so many families, it can be so daunting and stressful for parents. And you provide a great deal of support for parents. You have a number of strategies for them. And as I was learning more about you, I got really excited because you really make it so easy for parents to kind of walk through the process. You provide a lot of guidance for them. And one of the things that jumped out at me was that you talk about the 5 keys to productive IEPs. And, that really resonated with me, because parents just want their kids to get the support they need in order to access the curriculum and thrive. And sometimes they don't even know where to start rather. And when they're facing an IEP process, if it's something that there is unfamiliar to them, again, they don't know where to start. They don't know what to expect. And I think that those 5 keys to productive IEPs are a great place for parents to start in terms of knowing what their role is and what to expect and how to prepare.
Exactly right. As a school psychologist and as a teacher and as a mom sitting at the table, these themes started to run up over the years as being a school psychologist. And every time there was an issue at the table, the same themes would come up. And I started to realize the reason why we're struggling at the table is because we're not communicating, we're not talking in advance at the meeting, and we're not starting from the beginning. And then when it comes to the special education process and the special education experience, because it is an experience, it is a journey, it's not a roadmap, is that we have to start from the beginning. So as a school psychologist, that stems from assessments. So if you think about IEPs and the process, imagine you're looking at a house. So if you've ever built a house or been involved in a house or heard friends talking about having a house, we all know that you have to have a solid foundation. So the house that we live in now, we moved into it and we had heard stories, but it was true. It was actually leaning sideways. And so we moved in, the doors weren't closing, the windows weren't closing, and we tried to make it work. And we came to the reality, we have to actually we have to go under and redo the foundation. And when we jacked up the house, that's when things got better. Otherwise, we were just doing a Band-Aid. So the same goes for IEPs. When you have what's called a sufficiently comprehensive assessment, you identify the child's needs, you assess in the areas that are suspected, but you really develop the foundation. And that's the foundation for the house and foundation for the IEP and the student, what they need. So the foundation is the bottom of the house. And then the next step is parent input. As a parent sitting on the IEP team, I always felt that I was kind of handed the paperwork. I'd walk into the meeting, they'd say, here's what we're doing. If we reframe that process and we start from, as a school perspective, reaching out to the parent saying, what are you concerned about? And that has to do with the referral reason. What would you like us to assess? And not just the standard battery, but what is your child really struggling in? And when we reach forward and gather that information, and as a parent, we're able to empower ourselves at the table, that is the framework that we need to build the house for productive IEPs. On the other side of that has to do with being more comprehensive and collaborative. So when I talk about collaborative, it goes both ways. So when I was a school psychologist, we often came to the table and I would have to kind of require the special ed teacher send me the information before, talk to the parent. Okay, did you turn back in those forms to me? Talking to the teacher. Okay, did you turn in the forms to me? I was kind of gathering bits and pieces. So myself being kind of putting everything together, I usually made it work and we cobbled it together. A lot of times this doesn't happen. And if I'm the only one doing it, or if another psychologist or another teacher is doing it, imagine how it feels for the parent. So if we start from the process at the beginning, while we're going through the assessment process, while we're going through the referral reason, and the parents and the school are talking together, it saves time. It decreases litigation. It improves the meeting, and it actually cuts the meeting time in half. So it takes a little bit more of work in the beginning. Everyone knows if you want to be a good advocate, 90% of your advocacy is done before the meeting. So you do this all before. It's not more effort. It's just deciding where you're going to put the effort. And then when it comes to finishing up developing productive IEPs, the two last portions that you can't live without are draft reports and IEPs and outcome-based IEPs. So when it comes to draft reports, what I'm talking about is that before the meeting, you provide as much feedback to the parent as possible. So you give them the present levels of performance. You ask them, okay, check this informational page. Is your address right? Is this right? If the parent wants the information before, ask them, these are the goals we're suggesting. What do you think would be appropriate? That little bit of input before goes so much farther because it gets the parent input. Parents have the right and can actually write what's called a parent report, which is where they talk about, here's what's happening at home. Here's what I'm seeing. Then the school can incorporate that into the present levels page because the parent knows so much more than the rest of the team, right? They've been there the longest. They know their child the best. So that is the roofing that we're looking for when it comes to productivity for IEPs. And the outcome-based IEP is based on all the other aspects that we already spoke about. That naturally comes because you're developing a comprehensive assessment that's focused on strengths and where do we go from here. You've collaborated before the meeting, and you've developed a plan that's sensible and relevant and useful. So productive IEPs is totally achievable. It can be done, but we have to reframe how and when we communicate.
And all of that is so important. There's so many pieces. I'd love to kind of dig in deeper because, you know, when you talked about that foundation, the assessment, that comprehensive assessment is such an important piece. And it kind of goes hand in hand with getting that draft report, which will include the results of that assessment, because the person who's doing the assessment, I mean, their findings need to be, and you often say this, relevant, useful, and meaningful, right? And so we want to make sure that that assessment, like you're saying, is comprehensive, that it really highlights a child's strengths, what it is that they know, but also those areas of difficulty, that those areas of struggle, the impact of those struggles on their ability to access the curriculum, to, you know, how does it impact their daily functioning? Because like you said, that's the foundation. That's what we're working with. That is what will determine whether a child is even eligible for special education services through the school district and what that intervention looks like.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When it comes to assessments, when I was a school psychologist, and I saw this as a parent too, is that we are heavily trained on still looking at what's called the medical model. So I was trained to look at what's wrong. What are the deficits? What are we seeing here? What's the standardized test scores say? Well, in reality, a lot of these tests out there, even the ones that are valid and reliable and all the ones that they tell us are correct, it's a snapshot. And a really good assessment is based on functional academics and is heavily weighed on multiple measures. So when it comes to multiple measures, this has to do with observations, what's called the riot method. So in school psychology, the riot method is you review the records first, right? You get the parent input first. That's the reason for referral. That drives the assessment. What are parents concerned about? Then you look at all of the prior records, the report card grades, the observations the teacher said, the themes. There are themes that you'll pick up in. Then you do the observations. And when it comes to observations, you want multiple observations in multiple settings by multiple providers. It doesn't necessarily take more effort. It's just a conscious way of doing things. So as a school psych, I would observe in a class where the child did really well when I worked in the high school. And then I would go into the class that everyone was saying they were really struggling in. So I could see the difference and I could see those strengths and highlight and capitalize on the strengths in the assessment. And then when it came to the assessment, you want to use multiple measures. So that would be a broadband measure, right? A really big test, perhaps something like the WISC, which is an IQ test, and then something more narrowband. And then you're looking at, what does this say? How does this relate to this? And then what are we seeing in the classroom? And the functional academics is the piece that so many assessors are missing. And this is really where it counts. How is the child using the mastery of their knowledge, right? What's their inferential learning? Can they read the room when they walk in the room? And so when it comes to comprehensive assessments, we need to look at more than the standardized test scores because they tend to miss the mark. And many students who have exceptional needs, like students who have ADHD, for example, tend to test well. And so time after time as a school psychologist, or even as a parent, I experienced, well, they're doing well on the test. They don't need an IEP when in fact they missed that whole other aspect of, did they finish their work on time? Did they do their homework? Does it take them 4 hours to complete assignment instead of 2? That functional performance is where we actually get the goals. It's actually what really matters, because if you test well and you're failing school, you're not able to access the core curriculum. So comprehensive assessments need to go beyond the legalese, beyond all the standardized test scores, and really capture the entire aspect of the child. And that's where strength-based assessments and strength-based IEPs can really revolutionize how we meet together as a team.
Absolutely. And that's why I always say that the test scores, like you're saying, are just a snapshot of where a child is at that particular moment and how they're able to do that test on that particular day at that time in this ideal setting, right? But you have to interpret that in a context, in the context of their home experience, their school experience, and their ability to navigate during their everyday. And the ADHD example is such a good one because so many kids can do well on tests in a one-on-one setting where you've minimized distractions. It's just the person and the child and the assessor, and they're able to focus on just one task at a time. But then you get the rating forms from parents and teachers, and you see that in their daily lives, they can't manage all of the distractions, the executive functioning demands, the ability to persist on a particular task over an extended period of time. And so that input and that information is so valuable and important because that really determines where the intervention should focus and the kinds of support and the level of support that kids need.
That's so true. One thing I noticed, Karen, I'm sure you'll attest to this too, is when we get comprehensive assessments, not only does it drive the IEP because assessments are based on the IEP, right? It's needs-based and not placement-based or eligibility-based. But when we really look at that functional academics, it also helps to determine what are the types of goals. So going back to our example of students with ADHD, time and time again, as a school psychologist and a parent, I would see students not qualify for services. I just had this yesterday with a client where the parent came to me and they said, we did an assessment. I thought that I was doing everything I was supposed to and telling my school my child struggles to attend, she can't complete her assignments. And then they came to the IEP and the student didn't qualify and they gave her a 504. And mom was like, I don't understand, she's failing. And so the assessor missed the referral reason, and they didn't look at that it took the child 5 hours to do the same assignment as everyone else, and the report card grades were not good. So getting better assessments can really, really address kids' gaps and can really help this disproportionality that we have with so many schools and so many students not getting the services they need because the assessment didn't address the referral.
And, that is so important. And again, that's why parents have to be involved. And I think that's one of your other key elements is parental involvement and parental engagement in the process. And parents have to realize that they have the right to fully participate in all aspects of the IEP. They are, like you say, a team member. And I'd love for you to speak about the importance of getting parent input. I love the fact that you mentioned a parent report. That is, I think, something that parents don't even think about doing, about contributing a document to the process.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I often say that parents make the best advocate. And the reason why is that regardless of whether you have any educational experience or you've been to college or you've graduated from high school, if you think about being on the IEP team and you look around at the table, you have actually been on the team longer than anyone else. So as a parent, you have raised your child or your guardian to your child. You know your child. You know what they can do and can't do. Perhaps you don't have the same language. You don't have all of the, expertise that everyone says, but that makes you no less valuable than everyone else. And unfortunately, when it comes to being a parent sitting on the team, we walk into the room and there's 20 other people in the room and we're taught to, okay, we sit and listen. These are the experts. And we all know as a parent, when you go to the doctor and your child isn't sick and they say, oh, everything's okay, we know in our hearts something is wrong. I just know it. And so when we understand as a parent that actually you have a lot of this ability to ask questions and to be able to contribute a parent report, you can write down, okay, at home, this is what I'm seeing with my child doing homework. At home, when we go to birthday parties, my child is having a meltdown. All that information is data. You don't have to be a certified, assessor to be able to take data, and you can incorporate that into a parent report and send it to the team before and say, here's what I'm seeing at home. Here's what I'm seeing in the community. And I want you to incorporate this into the IEP because my present level section is the data that I'm seeing. And when we're an assessor and we're at the IEP table, they're supposed to be incorporating the aspects of home and community and functional performance into the realm of academics because it all works together. It's not just about goals based on classroom, math and reading. It's all the other aspects. So as a parent, you can contribute and write a parent report. And imagine how empowering that is for you as a parent to walk into the table, not have to feel stressed out. You've already put everything into writing. You have your ideas clear. It's calming and relaxing and makes it so much easier when you come to the table.
And so many of these suggestions and these key elements that you're discussing make the process easier. You talked about making sure that you have a comprehensive assessment, recognizing that the parent should be actively involved in the process, including sharing their input through this parent report. The other thing that you talk about that I think many parents, I don't think have received this, but getting a draft of the report, getting a draft of the IEP before the meeting. I thought that was standard and expected.
So because I've always practiced in California, I assumed it was not standard in practice. And so I was told as a school psychologist, don't give the report before. And I was told this by many, many districts in many different parts of town. And so not until I started getting these requests to do it before, and then I realized, okay, if I send it before, not only have I gotten all my work done prior to the meeting, but also usually at the meeting, the parent just wants a summary so we can actually get into the meat of the IEP and finish the IEP by the end. And then over the years, as I started speaking to friends who were out of states and other states, it was standard practice, I found out, to give the drafts before. And I started to realize, why were they telling us not to give the drafts? And there's this misnomer and misunderstanding about what's called predetermination. And so when I was practicing in California, we were told, oh, no. If you give the IEP or if you give the assessments before, it's predetermining placement. When in reality, if parents understand they're getting a draft, if parents understand, here's what we're seeing so far, and that we're going to talk about this at the table, it doesn't predetermine placement. It doesn't tell the team, oh, this is what we're going to offer. It just says, here is what we're seeing, and we want your input at the meeting. It's a draft, and everyone understands it's a draft. So when we reframe it from that perspective, getting the drafts saves time. Getting the drafts helps the parent. Imagine if you're a teacher and you were to go to Disneyland and they said, sure, you can come into our parks right now, but you have to read this 50-page document and there's people behind you in line and you got to read it right now. That's the feeling that we parents get when we walk into a meeting because we're handed this paperwork. We're told the meeting, we have 30 minutes. There's a teacher waiting outside. How can anyone understand that? It's impossible. So it really helps to complete the meeting. It gets everyone's work done. If you're a teacher, you'd be really happy getting a draft because then you know everyone else finished their portions of the IEP by the time you had the meeting. So drafts are just a game changer because you're doing it before.
Right. And it seems like it gives parents also an opportunity to see, does what is in the draft IEP match up to what they're asking for? And then they can, again, it's an opportunity to discuss that at the meeting so that they can more effectively advocate for what it is that they believe their children need based on their observations. And again, have an opportunity to look at whether or not their observations match onto what is being proposed in the draft IEP. It just it gives an opportunity to use that time in the IEP more effectively to make sure that some of the strategies that the parents are advocating for are consistent with what the child needs. And if something is not in the IEP draft report, it's an opportunity to make sure that they bring that in and talk about it so that it can be incorporated.
Yeah, that's very true. Going back to the parent report, one thing I found speaking to many other assessors in different states is that each state, each local area, even the districts that I worked in California, they in their SELPAs, which are groups of districts together, they would have a different interpretation on the IEP form of what the parent, they called it parent concern section, parent need section looks like. One thing that I found universally across states and across districts is that in general, the parent input section is about 3 lines long. That is not enough space. And so if you incorporate your information in a parent report and turn it in prior to the meeting through a parent letter of attachment, you actually attach your documents to the IEP. And typically the way it works before a meeting is that the parents are sometimes asked for their input. And to be honest, a lot of times when we would be having a meeting and I was a school psych, we would ask the parents at the meeting. And so stuff that was their concern, stuff that was things they wanted to talk about, didn't even get addressed. So the only way to ensure that what you're saying in your heart and what's actually put on the IEP is the same is by turning your information in before so that even if there's only 3 lines that are given to you on the IEP document, that you have that opportunity to say, here's what I'm thinking. Here are my child's strengths. Here's what they can actually do. And here's what I would like the team to review and consider at the meeting.
The other thing that you say, April, is that we really need to focus on outcome-based solutions. And I'm thinking about the IEP document that we're talking about. We need to focus on outcome-based solutions and not position-based arguments. I would love for you to talk about what you mean by that, because I think that is so important, particularly in the spirit of collaboration, which is, again, one of your key elements.
Yes. So many times when I was on the school side, and I don't like to take sides, but I'll just use it in this example, is when I was on the school side, we would always say, okay, the parent wants this. The parent is saying this. And then as a parent coming to the other side of the table, I would say the school is always doing this. The school is always doing that. That is taking a side. And then we lose the fact of when we're coming together, we actually need to talk about the child. So a position-based argument on the parent's perspective might be, okay, my child needs speech. They need 30 minutes of speech. I'm going to walk into the meeting and I'm going to be thinking about my child needs 30 minutes of speech. That's thinking about a position, right? Mm-hmm. I want this service for this amount. At the same time, the school might be saying the same thing. Well, John needs to be in the SDC class. He has an intellectual disability, so he needs to be in that class. That's a position-based statement. It loses sight of what I talked about earlier, about in order to create productive IEPs, we need to come from a basis of comprehensive assessments. That's where we lay the foundation. It loses sight of where we are, right? And about needs-based. And when we stop talking about position-based statements and reframe back to the child and what the child needs, it changes things. If we go back to the child, then when mom goes into the meeting and asks for 30 minutes of speech, she realizes that's not the way to ask for things. The way to ask for things is to talk about, what does the present levels say? Is my child achieving their goals? What does the assessment say? Oh, the assessment says that they need these areas of support. Okay, well, is that addressed in the goals? Oh, okay, it isn't. So we're going to address it in the goals, and the goals are going to be carried out by services. There we get the 30 minutes. And at the same time, at the school, if the school is saying, okay, well, the child needs to be in this placement, and they realize, oh, they have an intellectual disability, but the present levels page says the child has an intellectual disability and they don't need a modified curriculum, they're able to access the general education program, that tells the team, oh, they can be in a regular classroom and be fully included and get maybe some pull-out support. So it reframes it from an eligibility-based, a position statement, to a needs-based and a child-based finding.
And I think that sometimes gets missed. And I love that you mentioned that, because I have heard from parents and seen that they get so stuck on advocating for a particular amount of time for a particular service. But again, focusing on what are the outcomes that you want for your child? Where are they now? Where are the gaps? Where are the weaknesses? And what is the goal to close that gap and to address those weaknesses? And how do we effectively do that? And that really brings the focus again to the child and the outcomes that you want for your child.
Yeah. It's, for those of your listeners out there that have more than one child, think about when they were a baby, right? When they were first born, and you have this child in front of you, and all you can think about is the moment, what they're doing. They're crying. I need to be able to get them to sleep. Mm-hmm. And then as they get older, you start to reflect back. Man, those days that I could only sleep a minute, all I could think about was sleep. And in reality, you lost sight of what was happening at that time. And so if you have more than one child, okay, when they were 2, if you had the idea of what to expect later when they were 5 or 6, it changes your framework. So this is where I help families understand what's called a vision statement, which is where we go beyond the annual IEP, which is about just a year from now, what we expect, to 2 or 3 years from now. So it could be that your child is in 5th grade and they're about to have a transition IEP, and it's not about getting X, Y, and Z services. It's about, okay, they're going to go into middle school. What do I think that they need in a few years? Do I think they need the paraeducator? Maybe they can do this in 2 years. And then you work your way back. So when you come to the IEPs, it's not about that point in time. The outcome-based IEP is really more of a trajectory forward. Even though the IEP only goes 1 calendar year, as a parent, you can think about, here's my 3-year plan. It doesn't mean it has to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you just magically can think out of a bottle, but it does mean that you think ahead and then scale back to determine what are the steps that I need to take to get there. And those small baby steps can be each annual IEP. And that really reframes your perspective and makes it easier to get there.
April, I know there's so much more that you could share. I mean, you have so much experience, so much knowledge, and you share a great deal on your website and in your work with families. If parents are listening and they want to connect with you, to ask questions, to work with you, what is the best way for them to reach out?
So thank you for asking that, Karen. There's a bunch of different ways that parents can reach out. They can go to my website, riseeducationaladvocacy.com. If they want to reach out to me and are interested in working with me or interested in my do-it-yourself virtual workshops, they can reach out to riseeducationaladvocacy.com/contact.
Wonderful. And I will be sure to put links to your website and that information in the show notes. April, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate all the work that you do, and welcome to the Child Nexus community.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you so much for being with me here today. If you would like to connect with April and learn more about how to build a better IEP, be sure to reach out to her. Her information is in the show notes. One of the things I often hear from parents is that my kids are getting support at school, but I need to know how to support them at home. If that's you, you are not alone. And that's why we created mini courses to walk you through understanding your child's diagnosis of dyslexia, ADHD, or anxiety, and give you the tools to better collaborate with your child's treatment team and educators and better support your child at home. Go to childnexus.com to register and reach out to me personally if you have any questions. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.